in conversation. So
So, oh, and Abdinor had already warned me. So anyway, let's see. I've learned quite a bit in the last 2 months or a month. Based on the criticisms I received, I got some excellent criticism from, oh, come on, the really smart lady who's a real leader
Emily
in
Scott.
interactive fiction. I
Emily
can't-
Short.
I'm
Sorry,
sure.
Emily Short. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Got the last name wrong.
She made some excellent criticisms. On the other hand, just yesterday, I got some criticism from another lady who has some professional experience and whom I will not name, who just had this insane, she was saying, well, Arthur is obviously a misogynist, sex pervert, something. She was, and Guinevere, she didn't like the fact that Guinevere was a nagging fishwife, and it was, what? Was the URL wrong or something? So one thing I have found is that very, very few people actually go very far. Most people, give it about 10 minutes play and then draw their conclusions based on that, which conclusions are necessarily way off the mark. So I'm having difficulty figuring out exactly how to interpret the criticisms. One other thing I did to help me was I came up with a system for identifying how far people got into the story world. I record every move you make. I did not want to compromise people's privacy, so I needed to identify or separate if two people were playing at the same time. So I stored the size of their screen and what operating system they were using. And so size of screen, operating system, this is what turn they were playing and what choice they made. Long list. And what I found from that was that basically nobody's doing anything. So, oh, good question. Criticism. Well, I see criticism that is almost synonymous with feedback. That is criticism that says, Chris, wow, that's brilliant. You're a genius. This is the greatest thing ever made, is useless. And so feedback that points out flaws is useful. So anyway, let's see what else. So I found very few people are actually doing anything with it now. But as a result of Emily's criticisms, I went through ripping out lots of encounters. Basically, the rule was if any encounter that is simply expository goes. For example, all of the ones with Nephion, the bard, where he tells these long stories, out. I think I took out about 24. Very painful, but too bad. I also began implementing a procedure of every encounter must permit some sort of good decision. And if it doesn't permit a good decision, then it goes. So I had to do a lot of work on that as well. And finally, I went through all of the Merlin trees to make sure that they all lined up properly, because there were some where the you make choice A and it jumps to nowhere or something. Oh, good question. What do you mean by a good decision? An interesting decision. That is, it's easy to put in a decision like, I kill him versus I cut off his head. That's not a good decision. So yes, dramatically significant decision. A decision that will have an effect on the final outcome, however tiny. So anyway, this has been very slow work, but I have made a lot of progress, and because of it, I have shifted the designation. We are now in version Delta, and we're on right now Delta 1. I also found there are a lot of flaws towards the end. In fact, some outright bugs. And I attribute those to the fact that right now you have to start at the beginning and go all the way through to play test the end. So I'm going to be modifying the code so I can jump in right at the end and do some serious play testing there. So that's the situation now. I don't think I can guarantee that it works well at the end. Again, I'm still just beginning to play test that. I suspect that it will take me perhaps as much as a month to finish the whole thing. So I'm hoping for and I'm also widening the release. I just announced it on the interactive storytelling Facebook page, but I'm not going to announce it generally. That is on my personal Facebook page and on any other sources I can find. That won't happen until I'm really satisfied with it. So sometime in December, I suspect. I will say that one of my rules of good design is you keep working on it until you can't stand it anymore. And I am starting to reach that point. So that will determine the termination of editing work on it. So that's the situation with Morte D'Arthur. Any questions, observations? Oh, I'll also mention, oh, go ahead.
I was curious what you thought about, I wasn't in the last one, but I emailed you a suggestion, which is that because you have a Merlin encounter about once per act, about like 4 or 5 times. I don't know exactly how many, but it's important. And actually spoiler alert, if it's okay with you, the core mechanics are that the way that you are more or less of a jerk or more or less magnanimous with your people is really secondary to the spirituality variable, which depends on your answers to the Merlin questions. So you can kind of be a jerk, although I feel like it's not your nature to put in options where Arthur's rude. So you did put those in, but he's more virtuous than like Tony Soprano, for example, who kind of like, I've been watching The Sopranos with my wife, and it's a show where like nothing much happens. It's kind of everyday life, and the periodic killings feel normal. So this is, and you're the leader of a mafia. So this is human civilization at some level, and this is Arthur at some level, but he's a lot more of a gentleman than Tony. And Tony Soprano has a code of chivalry too. He's a little more sexually adventurous and so on. So that's kind of good. That's I think a bit of positive feedback that you could think about. And that this is a great modding base. But anyway, getting back to the point, my suggestion was that Merlin would periodically give you procedural bits of dialogue based on what you actually did in the intermittent act, and then give you a question about what you did. And this is a way of giving summary feedback instead of like current continuous feedback, more strategic feedback. And then if you were like, yeah, I'm a jerk, you're right, because that demoralizes people and that's bad for the long-term kingdom or something. And then you get spirituality for that. So even if you're a jerk, right? And whereas right now he kind of gives you like the obvious good answer, and then there's this kind of deeper riddle answer. And if you go for the riddle answer, then you get the spirituality. And if you go for the kind of like easy, obvious, seems smart, but isn't that wise answer, then you lose spirituality. And then at the end of the game, if you have over 0 spirituality, maybe you revise the numbers since I played it. Then you go into the Mordred fight in a self-sacrificing way, so nobody else has to die in the battle. Only you die, and that's like the best death, right?
Yeah.
And it takes non-zero spirituality or non-negative to accomplish that.
Actually, it's there. There are 2 dimensions. There's Arthur as leader and
Yes.
Arthur as student. Now,
Yes.
with Arthur as leader, it's not a question of being a jerk versus being virtuous. It's really a trade-off between being perceived as nice or perceived as decisive. And you need both of them. And so
Yes.
in every case, in every one of those problems, you have to decide, well, is it more important that I appear to be a strong leader, or more important that I appear to be a nice guy? And that depends on your past. That is, you could choose a series of nice guy decisions that make you look weaker as a leader. And then you better compensate by making some strong decisions. Moreover,
Well,
it's never an even balance. There are some situations where it's like the trade-off is lots of this versus a little of that. And so it's
yes.
these.
Well, Mordred will give you negative feedback, or like Kay will be or the other older, I forget the name, but it's a good old school kind of name. They'll get a Sagramore. He'll get mad at you if if you're trying to be too beneficent or too generous with other people. That's another thing we could try in modding if you don't feel like doing it, because you're, or maybe it's interesting to try on your part. I think you should, is putting p-values back in for the kinglets and Mordred and possibly Guinevere, and that the Guinevere affair could be an optional subplot. But now we're getting into the weeds a little bit. Anyway, so right now the core of the game is answer Merlin correctly. And what I'm suggesting is you simply take a bunch of number readings or flags from the previous session and use that to interchange either some adjectives or some phrases in the text, and then the options.
I have begun working on deferred reactions, which entail the creation of global variables that can span long temporal separations. And that can get very messy indeed. And so I've been careful with that. So far, I've implemented one such variable, and I am considering about half a dozen more. But I am fearful.
Yes, I like that.
that this will make it too messy. I mean, this is a big thing on the player, and I worry.
Maybe that's good though, because that's part of the riddle. So like the way I see it is that you've got the Stoic philosophy and you've got the Christian values. And the Christian values are just like give everything away, kind of don't be like powerful in a way, right? So so being Christ-like is not good for kingship. And then you can be like Marcus Aurelius, and you can try to keep these other guys on your side and be more realpolitik, right? But then if you have this tapestry of variables that you want to set up based on the Merlin plots and make it messy, that could be interesting. I know the problem right now is de-obscuring what the point is and what the mechanic is for the player. And like when I played it, I role played consistently good, but I also try to reward my guys, right? And that led me pretty well. And I was even able to speed run a little bit, which I know goes against your ethos of like having it like a novel and taking a lot of time to read everything. But I could like speed read it and kind of get the gist of what I'm choosing and choose it on that principle. And so I role played like a lawful good king, and I got the lawful good ending. where my life mattered, right? Because I was self-sacrificing, but in a strong and pointed way, right? So add more variables, maybe do it as a branch, and you can get A/B testing on things, and also the qualitative feedback. But actually telling the player, like, what was the theme of the last act? Well, do you reward your generals, like make it like a riddle, and you can even do more dialogue options. So Merlin, like usually you have 3 options, and there's a certain cadence to that. With Merlin, it's very thought, and your answer really matters. This is the quiz in the class. The homework is not that important, right? It's the periodic tests from Merlin. So if you even, like, I think freely experiment, do it as a branch so you can compare. I think it's interesting, and it's the best place to focus it because those are so few encounters, and you're experimenting with the summary data, averaging together the last like 20 or 50 encounters or 100, which is a lot of data. So I think it's a great tapestry where you could get results in single day works sessions even. Yeah.
Okay, well, I will just mention 2 other small items. I continue to get excellent artwork from the Brazilian artist. She does a wonderful job, and we're going to continue doing stuff with her, although the fund for graphics is starting to thin. I'm selling off. I got all sorts of ancient crap that I need to get rid of, like hats. No, I got too many hats. This was fun to collect them, but it's time to sell these things off.
Do you have any more Atari stuff?
I'm just about, I found a little bit more, but I'm gonna hold off on trying to sell it. I had such bad luck. So almost everything I did, somehow I screwed up. So I'm
and these were like internal company documents, things like that?
I do have, well, in fact,
I'd be interested in like the books or design docs or anything.
Here you go.
Nice.
I might buy that off you.
Source code listing for the 1200. Yeah, I got a bunch of that stuff. I'm not sure how to sell it.
Sell it like it's historical memorabilia from, I've like run companies and I've done design docs and I've done budgets, and like, it's an interesting historic artifact.
Yeah. So
to me,
anyway, I might I don't know. I'm looking at it. I tried to sell some Erasmus books, and no market for Erasmus books on eBay. Anyway, but I've got to dig around some more. Oh, here we go. I don't know how to sell this thing. This is an old Bruderbund game on the Atari, and it's kind of mooshed up, so I didn't want to push it. Anyway, I'm going to do some more digging around. I'll fix that. The other thing I will mention, or the last thing I will mention, is that in response to the many requests that were made for Merlin to provide more detailed feedback, or any feedback on the player's performance, I made 2 changes. First, I completely wrote the introductory page of yellow text on blue background, in which I explicitly said, if you are a gamer, you will hate this. If you like interactive fiction, you will not like this. Who will like it? People who love movies like All Quiet on the Western Front, Casablanca, 2001: A Space Odyssey, stuff that's long and, has a lot of deep ideas buried in it, work. This is more Dostoevsky than comic book. So, and then the other thing is, I did have a place where Arthur demands that Merlin tell him what to do, and Merlin says, "Okay, turn around." And Arthur says, Okay, and he turns around, and then Merlin says, take one step forward. And Arthur says, okay, and it takes a step forward. And then Merlin says, take another step forward. And then Arthur says, don't play this game with me. So anyway, yes, thank you, Craig, for posting that. That's the introduction to that. So anyway, we need to close off this discussion so we can move on to AI. Any last questions on Morte D'Arthur? Okay, then let's move on to the interesting question of whether how AI will impact interactive storytelling. There have been a bunch of efforts along these lines. I've looked at some of them, and none of them impress me. Basically what they seem to do is, well, no, they're all different. Has anybody spent a goodly amount of time with any of these AI systems for interactive storytelling? Is there anybody who can inform us about any particular one?
If Chris has something to say, I'd love to hear it. But yeah, I was just playing with Novel AI. That was another email I sent you recently. You ought to spend a little time playing with it. They give you 100 turns for free. And then it's like, 10 or $15 and you get a month of it. So you really can like push the story in interesting directions on these things. And it's a technology that like the rate of change in image generation over just last October to this October is really significant. Because things have been open sourced and like OpenAI and like Elon Musk funding them, like sort of have some credit for that. But now it's like becoming its own industry. And then on the tech side, also, and the reason why image generation went through such a sort of popularized imagination leap in the last year, it's because it's combined with language technology, right? You've had the GPT-3.
Yeah.
So now you can do the prompts. And then like Midjourney just came out with another one and it's got a better language thing. It's not just that the image is better trained, but that the language module that interacts with the image module is better trained. So I haven't gotten a chance to spend my credits on that yet, but I've seen some images on Twitter. It's very, you get more thematically poised pieces out of it somehow. So it's quite good. And then on the pure text side, I feel like that's going to move even faster because of how light it is. And it's not as constrained by data and people making stories as data and so on. So like the synthetic data can feed into the text AI better. So who knows where that'll go in a year or two. And I believe it could adapt to game design models and to interactive storytelling models, and that we as story world builders will be using that as a tool to start iterating and then, peel things back, add heuristics, etc. Right. Whereas right now it's like they have like a Dungeons and Dragons mode, and you just start. You say you have a superpower, and it kind of goes with it, or you say you do something and it goes with it, and it can be a little goofy sometimes, and it can be quite funny sometimes. So and that's where it is in 2022. Who knows where it'll be in 2025? Woof, boggles my mind. So you really should check it out. That's my review.
Okay, Chris?
I guess I used AI Dungeon a fair amount a couple of years ago, and it's the issue there is that like it doesn't really understand what it's saying, and it doesn't have like a world model or anything, so it's not self-consistent, and also tends to go off on tangents. So you have to do a lot of curating and like deleting paragraphs that go weird and just like re-rolling to get different results. But if you do that, it can sometimes produce interesting stories. You just have to really hold its hand carefully. And since then, I've used it sometimes as kind of brainstorming ideas, because sometimes it throws together some ideas in interesting combinations.
Just to add to that point, those are great criticisms of AI Dungeon. Novel AI added this feature called the lore book. So if you wanted to do like Vampire the Masquerade, you go in there and be like, okay, there was this guy Cain, it was the first vampire, blah, blah, you start detailing it in, right? You want to do Harry Potter, you got to be like, well, there's these wizards and there's like these goblins that do the banking, and you get into it, and it can remember that, and they give you, depending on the sub tier, they give you 4,000 or 8,000 characters worth of this kind of sketch pad of things that the AI will remember continuously. But the lore gives you way more. You could put in, a module with, it could be, 100 megabytes, like just shit tons of, we could compile all of the, take the pictures out, whatever, compile all of the rule books of D&D, and it would know about Forgotten Realms, right? Like, so nobody's kind of done it at that scale yet, but they probably make enough notes that it gets interesting. So I haven't actually invested the time in doing that myself to try to really, I had just a crazy, like, if I'm tripping or I'm like having a dream where I'm flying and I'm like Goku. And so I thought, okay, if I had Goku powers and I was like challenging the AI on the premise that I have infinite power de facto, I'm like more powerful. Like, I'll just win with a coup de grace in one move if I want, right? But the adversary was this spiritual leader who claimed to be God, and every time I blasted him, he like came back like Freddy Krueger. And so the ending was that I got possessed by him, but that's how I like contained him, and then we just had to like live together. So that was interesting enough, and I wouldn't have come up with that. I would, if I sit down to write a sci-fi story, I don't write that story, So there's a certain, the formulaicness of writing is getting really well modeled by these things, and you have to be like really zany and even improvisational to go out to be like the cool guy, like instead of the AI is the crazy guy and you're the straight man, kind of like, okay, I like roll to fight, see how that goes. Because AI Dungeon will actually have game mechanics where it constrains your power and things like that, right? So that's another thing people can do, is they can overlay maps and other game genres and other game rules in addition to the text stuff. So it's going to be a crazy decade, actually. That's my prediction, is that people are going to be able to do full scale production of games based on a dream they had and invest like 2 months in it and kind of get somewhere. So I'm optimistic about that.
Concern with the AI systems I have seen so far is that none of them are really about storytelling per se. The ones I've seen are about the peripheral aspects of it. That is, how do we put together a good paragraph on a particular very narrow topic, or how do we connect these characters? There was one that, and even when they do characterization stuff, personality models, the personality models I have seen are pretty primitive, mostly Boolean in nature. Yes, this person is impulsive or not impulsive. And I don't think they have developed good algorithmic systems for managing the interplay of personality traits with behavior. That connection between personality traits and actual decisions is central. It's crucial. And the generalizations, the approach that I have seen tends to be highly generalized. And so I don't see much anything impressive there. The other thing that bothers me is that ultimately good storytelling is about the strategy, the big issue, not the tactics of writing a paragraph. And yet all the AI I've seen is about the tactics. The area that I think shows the most promise would be mysteries, because there is a huge database for AI to take advantage of. Mystery novels are ground out by the 100 or by the 1,000 every year. If you could get your hands on that information, digitize all those novels, and then you build your AI based on that, I think you could probably build decent mystery generator. The problem that I think will make that difficult is that all too often mysteries hinge on really fine details. I'll mention, here's a really good example. There was back in the 90s, there was a wonderful television series based on the Poirot mysteries. God, those were good. And I recall one of them, the crucial moment or the crucial action in the entire mystery it came from the fact that early on in the mystery, Poirot had been sitting on a bench next to the murderess and or the criminal, and she had mentioned that she hated horses. Much later in the mystery, the police and Poirot enter her apartment. She's not there, and there's a clay sculpture of a horse's head, and Poirot takes one look at it and starts tearing it apart with his hands, and the detectives are saying, what are you doing? You're destroying that work of art. And he rips it apart and pulls out the murder weapon, the gun. And it was all because he remembered they had this long conversation in which she just happened to mention that she hates horses. Now, do you really base, if you're going to base a murder mystery on something like that, or the fact the dog didn't bark from the Sherlock Holmes mystery, there's so many of these things that are so the little tiny details that the author of the mystery sneaks in and on which the whole thing turns. Oh boy, I'm not sure AI can be smart enough to detect those things and then build a mystery around them. So I'm not sure. The other area that would be very productive, or at least for which there is a huge database, is soap operas. Unfortunately, soap opera scripts are not readily available. They're all television stuff, and I very much doubt that the owners of soap opera scripts will say, sure, you can have all of my scripts so that you can put me out of business. So although that would be the most productive approach, I mean, the most likely to succeed, I don't think we'd ever get the data necessary to make it work.
I mean, you can find like thousands of Hollywood scripts. I would think even if you don't have the official shooting script, you could take, say, the closed captioning, and that would give you like 90% of what's going on screen.
Although you do have one tangential thing which might be related, which are romance novels. And you can buy romance novels and mysteries, and there you go. You've got soap opera.
And those tend to be
Good
really,
well, go ahead, Chris.
Those tend to be really like tropey and formulaic too, so it might be well suited to this.
Yeah. I mean, right now, romance novels, my understanding is that it is a rule-driven business where the editor just says, this is the way you will write it. And boy, rule-driven fits onto a computer just great. So that might be the first area where we see a breakthrough. So certainly.
So I mean, I think it's worth noting that the pleasure of the current level of interactive textual AI is on the level of like you have a dungeon master who's maybe pretty good, or a game master, and you're kind of doing a live role play. And if that got more sophisticated on a plot driven basis, that's one thing. Like your story world is very character driven. It's not about like a discrete sequence of events, except for there are a few discrete sequences to it, right? Yeah. It's more about like the wisdom of the ages, really, right? Yeah. Vis-a-vis this leader who's like at the outskirts and he's touching the void, and that, you know, he's responsible for everybody else and trying to find something to hold on to, right? It's like a struggle. It's a struggle to find meaning in the last year of your life is like really specifically what it's about, right? And it can be done is like what was amazing. And you solve all the problems. It is actually, it's like there's a beauty to it, right? And that's why the legend is what it is. So anyway, but the possibility of training an AI module, AIs may be overscribing it. These are like very large floating point matrices with certain iterative, you know, algorithms applied to them. Like neural nets were like, you know, 30 years ago, and now there's a bunch of different algorithms with different strengths and weaknesses, and then people play with those and they train them on a lot of data. That's really what's happened is we've had 10 or 15 years since Web 2, where the world has just created so much data footprint. And then we've also got like classical art history and all that stuff. There's a lot of that. It's been uploaded. So in the future, AIs could be writing scientific papers. Therefore, they could also be writing a story world in Sweepweave or in some other template. And they could be designing first-person shooter levels as well, right? Like whatever the game design nomenclature is, and what's like a good heuristic of form, and that could be layered in, and what's the basic mechanics of you're navigating space, you're navigating this graph with these weights changing. I think an AI could do a really good job if I say in a prompt, give me like a basic template of a story world where it's like a neo-noir and the guy's a detective and you have this relationship with your wife that's breaking up, but you can maybe save it. So that's a dynamic. And then you have your finances, but it's not too heavy and blah, blah, blah. Then it would generate some characters and the p-values and a network of encounters with really blasé writing. It might be block writing that are prompts for me to go and fill it in, right? Or whatever. That could be that's like a separate AI bot that I could use if I wanted help with that, right? Or I could do it all on my own, but it'll give me the actual structure of the story world. And then I can start iterating on it. I say, oh, well, that's not very good. I don't want any of that. It calls out a bunch of stuff. I say, I want to recalibrate this. I want them to be suspicious, but not, you know, they have a few things that make them biased in your favor. They have a few things that there's, you know, makes them more leery. And then those options get populated with those weights. And then you go in and tweak it out, right? So people could rapidly create story worlds. And it would finally bridge what you've been talking about for decades, which is the two cultures problem, because people can use entirely humanities-based interface to express what are also quantitatively expressible ideas. And they can get yeah.
I think we can benefit. Here's an interesting angle to approach this problem. Let's look at AI efforts in completely different artistic fields. There was a really striking example about, I don't know, maybe a year ago. Somebody had found, I believe it was the notes or bits and pieces of another symphony that Beethoven had been working on when he died. And they fed that into, they developed a whole AI system around it so that they could complete what they had partially. And I listened to the result and it stank. It had this mechanical feel to it. It didn't have any of the power of a Beethoven symphony. And I think that that's partially because the greatness of Beethoven was the way he set up a kind of counterpoint at the highest possible level. That is, the music would be going one way and then all of a sudden it jump off in a different direction. There was one symphony, I forget which one, the final movement, he pulled a joke. That is, he brings it up to the ending, you know, tempo is increasing, and then he slows it down, and then the tempo starts increasing again. It looks like the end. The drums are boom, 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 and no, this isn't the end either. And we're gonna develop this small melody here for a minute, and then finally we get to the real ending. It's really hilarious to listen to. I don't know if that was his intention, but the whole idea that makes Beethoven's work so great is the fact that it breaks it. He knows your expectations. He builds your expectations, and then suddenly goes in a different direction, and that's great. AI can't do that. I mean,
Right.
it's the whole idea is to follow the pattern, not break it.
Do you know if the reconstructed symphony used all of the original pieces without changing them?
No, I don't.
Okay, because
I
whether
think
it used,
I
yeah,
think they were just trying to fill it in.
mhm. Yeah, because if they used that without making any changes to them, that would be different than using it as a branching off point, because like in creation, sometimes you change parts or throw out whole sections or something that you don't like as you proceed in the process.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember CPU Bach by Sid Meier?
Oh,
Yes.
yes, yes.
It was on the 3DO. It made Baroque pieces that were in the style of Bach.
Yeah.
And you had to have a 3DO, unfortunately, in order to really run it. So I had one, and it was credible Baroque music, but it was not necessarily something that you would sit and listen to for hours on end, as you would
Oh,
maybe like a JS Bach or something else like that.
yeah. It was
And
brilliant, but way
yes.
too early.
Well, and part of it was, Baroque music is supposed to be pretty formulaic and how you construct it and such, and we talk about an algorithm right there.
Yeah.
And even with that, there's still those little tweaks in that, those little human touches in that make all of this stuff really work together.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. I was thinking about this with a different thing. So there's a book called Hamlet's Hit Points, and I posted a link to an electronic book version of this. One of the things, the premises of the book is about story beats. And the idea of the story beats is that you can have different things. And I don't remember, and I'm going to kind of futz, the various descriptions of this. So I hope you check out the book itself. And it is about going on an upbeat, going on a downbeat, going on an indecisive beat, all this other type of stuff. And I think that's part of what's missing with some of the AI stuff, is that it's not necessarily thinking about the story as an entire structure. It's kind of just riffing on it as you go along. It's like, okay, here's this particular thing. And I think that may be part of why this stuff is going so flat, is that it's not thinking of the overall story structure and how all of that stuff fits together. And that may be something that, I don't know how you would teach a computer how to do this. It's like teaching a computer how to be improvisational. I think that would be an incredible thing if we could get computers to be able to just, construct things out of whole cloth that are interesting.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the nuts that needs to be cracked with all of this stuff, is how do you get it so that the computer is actually perceiving, not necessarily thinking, but perceiving the actual story structure and how to move it into a direction that's interesting for folk.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that these AIs don't understand at a like high level structural view what they're creating. I mean, I guess like Chris says, it's always just at the sentence level, and it's not really thinking from page to page or chapter to chapter.
Well, in order to pull that off, you'd need data structures that reflect high level structure. You'd need to have, in effect, just as you have in movements in a symphony or concerto, you would need chapters as in a novel, but even then, the concept of chapter does not carry with it any sense of story structure. Now, there have been many, many efforts at defining story structure, and what is most informative about them is how none of them have anything in common. It seems every attempt to do this comes up with a different approach, and none of them, I think, are directly applicable to a computer. So perhaps what we'll need someday is for somebody to come up with this high level architecture that is computable.
Maybe, I don't know. I know there's been like some people that are talking about general AI is something that can do anything. I wonder if one approach to this for AI storytelling would be to let the system derive its own high-level structure just by like taking a story and analyzing it and deciding that, I don't know, like this follows Plato's 3-act structure or whatever.
Well, the difficulty there is it's got to be able to break it down into those components. And here's another way to express the problem. Stories integrate a huge range of human experiences and behaviors. And so a good story will bring together a much larger perceptual reality than a computer can cope with right now. In that sense, it's rather like language. Yes, we can do language comprehension on finding a nearby Chinese restaurant, but language comprehension of poetry or any really deep expression, that's still, the problem I have always quoted is that language mirrors reality, and therefore full language perception requires the incorporation of all of reality. You really cannot understand an awful lot of expressions in language without knowing a great deal about the world, especially all sorts of special expressions like based on politics or popular culture and so forth, the Orange Menace, or I don't know, there are just so many of these metaphors that our language teems with that only work if you know a great deal about the reality that people experience.
And
stories have that too. Go ahead.
and not even just this world, like at this moment, that wouldn't be enough if you could somehow store all of that in a machine, because so much of language and culture is like based on history and things that happened in the past.
Yeah. So this leads me to conclude that storytelling by artificial intelligence requires it will be decades before we can incorporate a large enough perception of the world to enable good artificial intelligence, even just flat story generation, not interactive, just linear. I don't think that's anywhere near within our grasp as yet. We should look.
Well, I hope at some level, I hope you're right. I think the positive takeaway is that the robots won't take our jobs, rather that we will be able to do our jobs on more terrain. Like, let's say we're farmers, we're going to mechanize agriculture, and it's like, a human iteration step is essential. But I'm very optimistic about just the next few years on that front.
It's rather like George Washington. I'm not sure he was the guy who said this, but he said, some guy from the Revolutionary period said, I am a soldier so that my children can be farmers, so that their children can be engineers, so that their children can be artists. And I think that's what AI will do. It will push, it will make the drudgery jobs, it'll put them out of business, take over that drudgery, and actually my belief is that we will have to employ people, more and more people as teachers, so that we get one-to-one student-teacher ratios. So, it was John Adams. Thank you. And I don't think he mentioned farmers. I think it was engineers and artists. Anyway. Ah, there we go. Oh, merchant. Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's funny how these quotes get altered over the course of so many, going through so many years and mouths.
I know Haniel asked, isn't that what Storytron tried to do with its webs and fate? But I'm not sure what they're referring to with that question.
Oh, yeah, I didn't. Could you expand on that, Daniel? Fate was an actor in the in Storytron. That is, just like anybody else, Fate could do things, and now Fate had great powers, but Fate actually represents the author intervening by inserting various dramatically altering actions into the sequence. The classic example I use is if the story is starting to get a little dull, Fate gets somebody's sister pregnant, and off we go. The important thing about Storytron was that it directly linked verbs to personality traits, so that any given behavior was controlled by the particular traits of the characters acting. But that had to be specified by the author, and that was the workload that proved to be a far larger than I anticipated. Fate equals author, so on.
Yeah, since we're on the topic of like automation of labor and the labor involved in composing Story World, can you give us an idea of the like just, you know, plus or minus 10-15% of how many hours cumulative work you put into this specific incarnation of like pre-production, beginning to actually compose things that would go into the JSON of your Story World, or however the format is, you know, the content. Well, it's all in JavaScript, right? But you know, beginning to compose encounters, and then I guess you've been in post-production, just kind of iterating on a kind of like a beta version since like May,
Well,
right? So that's, yeah.
I don't think Morte D'Arthur provides a useful data set for this because it was so highly experimental. I started on this project more than 3 years ago, and I really had no idea. My driving goal 3 years ago was, I got to do something using the Arthurian legends because I think they are so powerful. And so I just started writing a few encounters and thinking about where I wanted to go. And basically, I made the whole thing up as I went along. And it wasn't until about a little more than a year ago that I really started zeroing in on the central theme of death and the meaning of life, and Merlin as the probe that challenges the player. So all I can say is, you know, 3 years of work, much of it experimental. I threw away an awful lot of stuff. So it's difficult. Yeah, I can't offer any recommendations for anybody else unless they're going to follow the same pattern I did of simply setting out a very, very broad concept and then just starting to mess around with it. Still too early.
But since you started on the Merlin redesign, I remember mentioning that, and that was in 2021. So that was like maybe 8 months and I don't know, your productivity was like based on other chaos factors as well, like the winter, right? So you didn't work like 160 hours a month, but so it was maybe like 400 hours, 500 hours of labor to actually compose the content that is in the game today. Or I'm sorry, the story world.
That's very difficult for me to quantify.
Okay.
Because it was so variable. I would have hot periods and cold periods. I still remember one instance where I mentioned to my wife, boy, I've been really hot this week, because I'd gotten an awful lot done. And then, it's the creative urge. Sometimes you're just cold and can't get anything done. Very hard to say. Well, we are at the end of the hour here. Would anybody like to bring up any final questions, comments, whatever? Okay. Okay, well, thank you. I will get this thing, the video processed. And I will also thank you very much, Craig, for the thing on Hamlet's hit points. And I will see you guys in a month. And if you
Okay, cheers.
Pardon?
I wanted to add that if anybody else is working on any projects, like I know Chris is very prolific, and perhaps some of you are, and I have something that I've been in sort of like pre-production on, and I just licensed Sweep Weave. You might say I licensed it because I got the $4 Patreon on Sasha's page, and it's a nice UI, and he's doing some good work on it, and it really is like a good implementation of kind of like the synthesis of Storytron and what you've done in the last 10 years, including like together, right? So it's a nice piece of middleware that he's putting out as an open source thing under MIT. He's not even doing like a copyleft licensing thing.
Does he have the spool system running?
He said he was putting it in. The one that I downloaded didn't have it. It's going to be in soon, I guess. Yeah, that's like, spools are kind of like fundamental, right? Like,
I think so.
I was like on square one, and I'm like, oh, I need a spool, like to really, because I'm trying to do two protagonists. You can pick one.
Mhm.
So right from the get-go, I need a spool to like sort that, right?
I mean, you can kind of fake it by using variables and just keying what encounters happen based off of that variable. But yeah, it'd be nice to just have
It's very inelegant doing it like
in one scene versus another.
So we should have like I don't know, some kind of common some place to post about what we're all doing in this kind of seminar thread that different people attend at different times, and it's like 15-20 people, probably a few projects going on between us all.
Well, certainly I would love it if any of you would suggest a topic, presumably of your own work. That would always help. Whoops, we got Cornell just showing up an hour late.
But maybe well, like I don't have a Patreon because I try to make money by hustling VCs, basically, like is what I got going on right now. So maybe something will manifest there, and I can put some in another year. I could put some money into it if that works out. Because first we got to do finance stuff, but or if I got some money in the meantime from my other project, which I'm trying to finish. So I've had this sort of 8-year project, and it's in like C++. I'm now hacking C++ to finish it because everybody ran out of juice basically. But like I'd like to see this become a business for some people to the extent that they want to do it. And what's great about Chris is like, you've got FDR working for you, right, with the strong dollar, and so you've had the freedom to be totally exploratory, right? And then I'm thinking like people who have like very specific ideas about what they want in terms of the gameplay contour mathematically and also thematically, they're going to be able to generate a lot of content and put together like 300 or 400 encounter story worlds and then possibly expand on them. So it make it like really like feature length, you know, but do something like modest sized or even like 200, like a small story world, you know, be able to iterate, like come up with that in, you know, a few weekends and like 40 or 100 hours of work. Busking. Yeah, well, I feel like the busking style kind of can work in this medium as well. In fact, I'm kind of indulging in a little busking. You just mean like the craziness and the jester vibes. Okay, I'll look at itch. Yeah.
Okay, then. Well, thank you, everybody. And I'll see you next month.
All
Thank you
right.
so much for
Cool.
hosting.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.